What about controlling access to our assets? So now we're on that first real key area. Now we got that background stuff out of the way. Controlling access involves, well, different controls. We've talked about preventative controls, right? They reduce the risk. They hopefully prevent you from doing something, right? Or prevent the attack in the first place. You know, physical, preventative, maybe we have fences with barbed wire, right? Trying to keep you out, I'm trying to prevent something from happening. We could have detective controls. Those are for identifying violations or incidences that may happen inside of your organization or inside of your network. There's an incident, you call the incident response team. They come in and look at logs, CCTV, badge swipe logs, look at the audit trails. They're looking for information because they're doing detective type work, right? They're looking for the clues of what happened, timestamps, who logged in, when was somebody held accountable for this, were they even in the building, right? We have to go check everything that we possibly can to, again, put the picture together of what happened, what was going on. We can have corrective controls. So again, something has happened, an incident, but these corrective controls are for remedying the violations and the incidences, improving existing preventative and detective controls. So these corrective controls not only are supposed to fix what we had, we're learning from our mistakes. We say, we didn't have this preventative control set up just right. We need a stronger gate. Maybe we need guards. Maybe we need two of them, right? So we're going to learn from our mistakes and take corrective measures. So next time it happens, hopefully it doesn't, but if there's another attack, we'll be better prepared this way. We have deterrent controls. Could be for discouraging violations, discouraging attackers from coming in. Policies. It's a deterrent control, right? You say, this is the policy. If you breach this network, you're in violation of da-da-da-da-da. And this could happen to you. Now, it's not going to stop me, right? I can look and say, okay, and go ahead and click through. It's not going to reach out and grab my hand or anything like that. Those are not deterrent controls. Just making me think about it, thinking twice. The sign out in somebody's yard in the front of their house, protected by whatever, right? Telling everybody in the neighborhood they have an alarm system. That's a deterrent. That sign itself is not the alarm. That's on the inside of the home. But they have a deterrent out there to try to keep you from ever trying to get into the house. And most of the time it works, especially if that company's reputable. We have recovery controls, kind of go with our corrective controls. Something happened, we're trying to recover. Then we're going to move into those corrective controls. But recovery is restoring systems, restoring that information if we have it. Hopefully you're doing your backups. But we can restore that information and bring our network, bring our systems, bring that server back up. And then compensating controls. This is alternative ways for achieving a different task that we may have, a different way of looking at it. I like to think of this one as like looking outside of the box, right? We have all these controls, and we've been taught these for years. None of these have really changed over the years. All right, some of the technologies that we use, we improve upon it, but the underlying terminologies, the underlying way that we do things stays pretty static. But if you're thinking about compensating controls, try to think of other ways to use controls, other ways to use some of these technologies that we have available to us. And hopefully you're thinking of something that an attacker is not, and you'll be one step ahead the whole time. So preventative technical controls, all right? There's some technical controls we need to be aware of when it comes to prevention. Encryption. I think I've been talking about this throughout this whole video series. We want to use encryption like DES, triple DES, AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, right? AES 256, 256-bit, is the standard for top secret military data. So AES is a pretty strong algorithm, pretty strong encryption that we can use. Access control mechanisms, those are preventative technical controls as well, like biometrics, smart cards, access tokens that you may have. All right, those are all access control mechanisms. Access control lists, ACLs you may hear them called. Permission lists that define what a subject can or what they cannot do to a particular object. Remember, those objects are the ones that are being manipulated, right? The data, the files. We have remote access authentication protocols. So we talked about remote access a little bit, tunneling and whatnot. These are protocols that we could use for remote access, like PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. We have the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, CHAP. We have Radius, that remote authentication dial-in user service. And we have LDAP, that lightweight directory access protocol. All of those are preventative technical controls. Now, what about the detective technical controls? Well, violation reports, things that have happened, audit trails, huge, right? If you get called in, let's say you're a forensics analyst, or you help a forensics analyst, or something happened in your organization and you're the IT person, you're the security person, you're everything, come and find out what happened. The first thing you need to look for are those audit trails. If auditing is not turned on, if we don't have any logs to go back and look for or view, it's going to make your job very, very difficult, because you have, you always hear about people, well, follow the paper trail. Well, there is no paper trail. There's no electronic trail to follow, because you did not have auditing turned on in the network or on the systems. You don't have any way of pulling that data out of thin air, right? So if they didn't have auditing turned on, they're not logging in any information, like failed login attempts, object access, policy changes, rebooting the server, backing up the server, changing of passwords, account creation. None of that stuff is going to be in the logs. You're going to be in a world of hurt. It's going to be rough to do those forensics. You can also think of detective technical controls of being network monitoring tools and intrusion detection systems, because they're going to have logs on there. They're going to log the information of what's going on. So you could go back to the IDS and say, well, we came under attack at 4 o'clock today, and it came from this IP address, and this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. And you could formulate your report from that technical control, because it's keeping a good log. Now, although most, I can't say most, but technical controls are primarily preventative and detective. We could use them for corrective, deterrent, and recovery purposes as well, because we could go back and see what happened and undo what they have done. Now, physical controls, they ensure the safety and security of the physical environment, right? The building, the rooms, the office areas, the break rooms, those are very important, right? They're primarily preventative and detective in nature, these physical controls. So some preventative physical controls: security perimeters like fences, I mentioned that earlier. Locked doors, and again, locked doors, it depends on what kind of locks you have, right? On your home, if somebody wanted in that bad, they probably get through the lock. I don't have 14 locks down through there. It's not a steel cage. It's not steel bars running through it or anything like that. If they want in, they're going to get in. So it keeps the honest people out, right? Like I've mentioned before. But locked doors are preventative measures. Could be seen as a deterrent as well. If somebody tries to get in and they're like, oh, well, you prevented them from getting in. But if they know it's a locked door, if they see the cipher lock on there and they don't know the key, it could be a deterrent as well. Other physical controls, restricted areas, right? You see the sign, it says restricted area, or employees only, or restricted area must need top secret badge or secret badge. Or you go to the hospital, right? They have restricted areas, right? Doctors and nurses only, hospital staff only. So that may be a secure type area, surgeries, whatever. So those are restricted areas, physical controls, guards, dogs, all good preventative physical controls. I might see a guard dog as a deterrent as well. Physical controls also include motion detectors, right? These are detective physical controls. Video cameras. If I have a CCTV or I'm recording the building, recording the rooms, I have cameras outside, I can go back, as long as I'm recording it, I guess, I can go back and find out what has happened. So we could use these detective controls and say, well, I see you entered the building at this time, and 10 minutes later, because now I'm checking my technical controls, right? I'm looking at my logs, and I said, well, 10 minutes later, I see you logged into this system. And then it was 7 minutes later, there was a new administrative account created. So you see where I'm going with this, right? I'm painting a picture because I'm taking all these pieces from all these controls I have in place, and I can start putting it together on what has happened and start telling the story over again. Now, often physical controls are also deterrent in nature, like I mentioned just a second ago, like the fences, locked doors, security guards, dogs, motion detectors, video cameras, because you can see that from far away usually, right? Every building I go into, every time I go somewhere new, it's a habit, it's ingrained in me from all the security classes, from certified ethical hacking and everything, from CISSP. I'm always scoping out the building. I'm not looking for malicious intent, but I'm seeing what kind of controls like this they have. I'm looking for motion detectors. I'm looking for the cameras up in the ceiling. I'm seeing what kind of fences they have, what type of controls are in place. So if that does come up, it's good for discussions because that's firsthand. You know, we could be talking about physical controls and they say, well, you know, we don't have any around here. Well, yeah, you do. Did you not notice the cameras that you have in the ceiling? Right? You have huge, what do they call them? Those bowler flower pots, right? Those huge ones where you can't even move them with the car. I said, you got those in front of your doors so people can't come up. That's a physical control. That's protecting the physical environment. And then they're like, oh, but they see it every day and they may not think about it because they didn't implement the policy. They didn't put it in place, or they didn't have any firsthand knowledge about it, and they don't pay any attention. They knew it was there. They've been working for 5 years. They don't care about the cameras anymore. But again, those could be deterrents as well, because you can see those from afar, right? You walking up to the gate, there's a guard with a dog. Well, yeah, they're going to prevent me from getting in probably, but it's also going to deter me because I'm going to see it and probably walk the other way, right? I don't want to mess with a German Shepherd or anything like that. So those could be pretty effective deterrent controls, along with detective and preventative controls like we talked about. Now, what about identification and authentication? So let's talk about single sign-on, right? SSO. Now, I think we've talked about this one before in another domain as well, but this allows multiple systems to use an authentication server, a centralized server somewhere on the infrastructure where we can log in and it kind of acts on our behalf, right? So we log in, identity, we authenticate ourselves, we're good with our password or however we're authenticating ourselves. So now that server says, okay, you have access to all of these services, all of these applications out here on the web, or not, on the web, on inside of our infrastructure. So this allows us to authenticate one time, username, password, good, and then access multiple and different systems inside of our network, inside of our infrastructure, things that we own, things that we've tied back to that authentication server. Now, the good thing is, if you remember, it allows security administrators, system admins, network admins, whatever hat you have on that day, to add, change, revoke, modify, if you will, user privileges in that one location. So I don't have to modify your permissions on this application, and this application, and this service, and this service. Something happens, maybe you were disgruntled and you quit. Well, I don't have to go to all these systems now and modify your permissions and disable your account. I do it in one spot. And now, if you were to come back or wanted to do something malicious because you were so upset, you can't affect our systems because I disabled your account in one location. Now, the downside, and probably the primary disadvantage to single sign-on, it could allow an attacker, somebody with some malicious intent, to gain access to all of these resources now by compromising one authentication method or compromising your one account. So let's say your password gets compromised. Now I can log in as you and access all of these systems that you are authorized to be on. So, should always be used with multi-factor authentication, just for that very reason. And we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication, which again is more than just a password, which a password is what? Something you know, right? Now, something else that goes along with identification and authentication, and it kind of goes along with single sign-on too, is federated identity management. This is a much wider scale than just single sign-on, because this can go cross organizations almost to an internet size scale. So I can log on, still like single sign-on, I can log on to one location, but now I don't have to necessarily stay inside of my infrastructure. Microsoft calls these forests. So I wouldn't have to stay in my forest, I could go to somebody else's forest that I trust with a federated trust, all right? Federated identity management. And that's kind of how Microsoft does it now. You can log on to, say, your Hotmail account. And if you have a Live account or a TechNet account or Office 365 or any of those services, all you have to do is log on once. And as long as you don't close the browser, you can bounce to those different services without logging in again. But you're bouncing from application, service to service, and some of those you're bouncing from forest to forest as well. But that's your federated identity management. And that you set that up on the back end. So not real sure that a security professional would have to know the ins and outs of how to install that and how to configure that and how to make it work, but you need to know what it is, because it could be, just like single sign-on, a vulnerability. Because again, if I get compromised, my password gets compromised, or my login credentials become compromised, now what happens? The attacker can log on as me anywhere and somewhere else and maybe compromise somebody else's network. Now you may be liable. So we need to know what it is. We need to know what's going on. Now, federated identity management may use OpenID or SAML. SAML is Security Association Markup Language. It's derived from XML, but it's a way that we can have this federated identity. Now, with Enterprise Identity Management, which is also federated identity management, rather than having separate credentials for each system, the user can employ a single digital identity to access all the resources which that user is supposed to be entitled. Another word for entitled is what? Authorized. That's right. So when I log in and I can do something, that doing something is my authorization. Now, federated identity management permits extending this approach above the enterprise level. So again, we can create a trusted authority for digital identities across multiple organizations, like I was mentioning. I don't have to stay just inside of my infrastructure, my domain, my realm, my forest. I can go from one to another. Now, again, we don't have to know how to set the trust up. That's a whole different certification. That's a whole different ball of wax for us. But we need to know what it is. Because if they get compromised and they come over in our infrastructure, in our system, now that's a vulnerability to us. So we need to understand that. We need to know the ins and outs of federated identity management. Something else you need to be familiar with is Kerberos. Okay? Kerberos is a third-party authentication service that may be used to support single sign-on. And it's a beast all in itself as far as implementing Kerberos, but we need to know that it can be used to support that single sign-on. It kind of works on our behalf, and it uses symmetric encryption, and it provides that multiple authentication of both clients, which is us, and the servers. All right, so it protects against network sniffing. It can help with replay attacks because of the credentials that it holds for us. It sits in what they call a KDC, a key distribution center. This is where Kerberos kind of hangs out. So there's tickets in there. You may be thinking, well, it's Kerberos, so where does it get its name from? It is that three-headed dog that supposedly like guards the gates of Hades and stuff like that. So it's not exactly what we're talking about, but we're talking about these components. There's the KDC I was telling you about, the key distribution center. That is what authenticates our principals. It's the all-encompassing part of Kerberos. Now we have a principal, which is the client or user of the service. So that's the person asking for these tickets that we're going to talk about. A realm is a logical Kerberos network. So when you're talking about Kerberos, you can say this domain is in the Kerberos realm. So that should tell an IT professional, more than likely a server admin or system admin, that your domain is being taken care of by this particular KDC and this Kerberos network. Now we have something called a ticket. That is the data that authenticates the principal's identity. The principal, again being the client, they're going to get the ticket. That's what they're asking for. Now the credentials is a ticket and a service key that you're going to get from the KDC. We have a ticket granting service, which you talk to get this information. You have a ticket granting ticket, which allows you to talk to the ticket granting service. And then you have a client server, and that's just the communications between the two. So let me see if I can put this all together for you. You as the client, the principal, all right, you want to access a service over here, this file server, this whatever. But instead of going directly to that server, that service, and saying, hey, these are my credentials, may I have some services? We don't have this type authentication set up. We're using a KDC because this is a Kerberos realm. So you have to have a ticket to talk to that server, to authenticate to that server. Credentials are not going to do it this time. What you have to do is go talk to the KDC. The first one you're going to talk to is an authentication server. And they're going to say, okay, who are you? So you're going to authenticate to them. All right. Now, once you authenticate to them, they are going to give you a ticket granting ticket. All right. They're going to say, okay, here's your ticket so you can go talk to this other server. The other server you want to talk to is the ticket granting service. They're going to give you that golden ticket. So now you can go back to the original server and say, hey, I've got the golden ticket. Here you go. Am I good? And that server is going to look at it and say, yes, I trust the KDC because they're acting on behalf of everybody in the system. Come on in. Everything is good. So that way, they don't have to talk back and forth necessarily. We don't have a lot of traffic. We have this one system, this one service taking care of our authentication for us so we can reach different services inside of our infrastructure. Now, over in Europe, the European system, they have actually improved upon Kerberos a little bit because Kerberos doesn't have the confidentiality on the back end. It doesn't use encryption for those tickets. So Sesame, right? SESAME is the secure European system for applications in a multi-vendor environment. It is a single sign-on system that supports heterogeneous environments. So different environments out there. Way I think of it is a sequel to Kerberos. It's an improvement upon Kerberos. They act pretty much the same. They're not going to call it a KDC, and you won't have the Kerberos labels and whatnot out there. But as far as the infrastructure, how it works, this is kind of like the sequel to Kerberos. That's the best way I look at it. Now, coming up, we're going to continue with domain number 5, starting with identification and authentication.